Hi everybody, welcome back to my video podcast. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who's sending in questions. It's really important and it's really great that you're doing that because that's really what I'm basing these podcasts on. So keep doing that. If you do have any questions, it can be completely related to everything that has to do with aviation. Just send it in and maybe I'll do a short podcast about it, who knows. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the pre-flights. Which is what we pilots do before we come out to the aircraft, which I've had quite a few questions about actually. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go through this on the surface, pretty much what we do, but not going into too much detail. If you do have questions about details, then just please send them in and I will try to answer them in a text form, but it's just going to take too much time to go through everything in detail. So our day as commercial pilots generally starts by arriving at the airport. We come in our own cars generally, and then we find our ways through the airport security, just like you do, down to our crew room. When we get to a crew room, the first thing that I tend to do is locate the first officer that I'm going to fly with during the day, introduce myself, especially if we haven't flown together, and just check generally, as you do, how he is and what's happened since we flew together last. I will then try to locate my cabin crew, which tends to be sitting or briefing at the nearby briefing table, and just quickly introduce myself because I will be talking to them a little bit more later. Then I will go back to our briefing station. The briefing station is set up like a little desk with a computer on it, and from that computer we can access our specific briefing pack for the day. So in most cases I'm flying with great first officers that have taken the time to come in a little bit earlier to print out everything, which is great because it enables us to have a little bit more time for briefing. If not, if the first officer is coming in a little bit later, which happens sometimes, or if I'm in very early, then I will log into our briefing system. I will find the aircraft that I'm flying with on the day, and I will print all the applicable flight plans and weather and NOTAMs that's needed for that day. So when we have everything printed, the first thing that we're going to do is to get a look at an overview of the weather situation in the area that we're going to fly. We do that by looking at primarily our significant weather charts. Significant weather chart is a chart that's showing pretty much all of Europe, and we have our routes for the day plotted out on that chart, and it shows things like the if there's any jet streams in the area that we're flying, which might be associated with clear air turbulence. If there's any cumulonimbus clouds expected in the cloud masses we're flying through, if there's icing, pretty much anything that could have a negative impact on the flight will be printed on there. So that gives us a great overview over how the area looks like. We also have, together with the significant weather chart, we have wind chart at different flight levels, the levels that we're going to fly at and the levels we're going to fly through, which gives us what the wind is doing, what kind of direction it's coming from, and how much it is. That might be interesting if we decide to change flight level from the flight plan level. So we have a look at that, and then we go into a little bit more specific weather data. Specifically, I'm interested in, of course, the departure aerodrome, the destination aerodrome, and destination alternate. We might also have en route alternates if we're doing very long flights, for example, that we're looking into. So there's something called a METAR, which is the actual weather at the time, which is interesting to show, for example, the departure weather. If I'm flying from Girona, it might be interesting to know what kind of winds there are, for example, what the visibility is, to see which runways are in use, etc. And it's also interesting to get a feeling for how the weather actually is at our destination. Even though this is weather at the briefing time and not at the time of arrival, it's still going to give us an indication of what the weather is like and what the runway state is like, and so on. So there are different requirements for us to be able to start our flight towards this destination. The weather has to be above certain limits, and also our alternate has to be above certain higher limits. And if they're not already there, we're going to have to start finding other airports around which have better weather so that we can change our flight plans and take the correct amount of fuel. So in order to know that, we need a forecast as well. The forecast we're looking at is something called a TAF, that's a terminal area forecast, and it can be of different validity times. Generally it's around 9 hours. It can be 6 hours, 900 hours, 12, 18 and 24 hours. And it is a forecast in code format that shows us what's likely to happen. The reason that the forecasts are so short are that the shorter they are, the more accurate they are. And it gives us an indication of how likely it is that a certain weather phenomenon will occur. For example, it's prob 40 that it will start raining after 1 o'clock. That means that it's a 40% chance that after 1 o'clock it's going to start to rain. And also, well, there's different codes basically telling us how likely a certain weather phenomena is, or just that the weather is forecasted to be very, very nice. So once we have checked that, it's time to go in and check the NOTAMs for the same airports that I mentioned before. NOTAMs is short for Notice to Airmen, and it is a list for every airport with significant points of note on that airport. It can be nothing, but it can also be something major. It can be something like the runway is closed due to maintenance, or there's no fuel available at this airport, or that the instrument landing system is not available, only non-precision approaches available at the time of arrival. So it's very, very important that we go through these NOTAMs, just like the weather, very carefully to make sure that there's nothing hindering us from flying to the destination that we want to go, or the alternates. Once we have checked this, then we are starting to have a fairly good picture of what difficulties we might have during the day. So it's time to go in to look at our flight plans. We are using Lido flight plans, which is the Lufthansa flight planning system. And it's very, very accurate actually. They are generated for all our flights based on the weights expected with the number of passengers booked and the weather expected based on all the forecasts available. Together with our flight plans that we do get for all, if we're doing 4 flights that day, we'll get all 4 flights in the morning, but they're obviously based on the weather that's forecasted to occur at the time of flight. We normally doesn't get any flight plans from our dispatchers at our destinations unless there has been a change to the flight plan. So if there's a tech fault, for example, or if there's an aircraft change or anything significant like that, then we will get a new flight plan when we get to our destination. But generally we carry all our flight plans from the beginning of the day. Together with the flight plans, it's also important that we check the technical status of the aircraft. And we do that from a menu in our briefing homepage. We just find our aircraft and look at any technical things that are included in the HEAL list, which is whole item list. Generally it's very little there because our aircraft are very new and our engineering department is absolutely brilliant. They tend to take care of any smaller malfunctions that might have occurred during the night. But there might be small things in there. There might be an oven that doesn't work in the back. Or there might be something bigger that has to be taken into account. And if there is something that has fuel burn significance, then that will also be included in our flight plans. And we have to make sure that it actually is. In the flight plans, there will also be loads and loads of information about, for example, the height, so the flight levels that we're expected to fly at, if there's any shear indexes, as in if we're expected to encounter turbulence, what kind of mountainous area we're flying over, what the safety heights are, and also all of our fuel information. So together with the overview picture that we've made now with our weather, NOTAMs and the flight plans, we can start to talk about what kind of fuel we're going to carry. Like I said before, the Lido flight plans are very, very accurate. We need fuel to fly from our airport of origin to our destination, and then we need to be able to fly a missed approach and a SID, standard instrument departure, from our destination, then a standard instrument arrival into our first alternate. And then on top of that, we also need to be able to fly half an hour, which is called the final reserve fuel. So the fuel that we have, our minimum fuel that we have on our flight plans, is generally ample fuel to get to where we're going. So normally we carry that fuel rounded up to the closest 100 kilos. Now, there are situations, for example, where there is weather phenomena like fog or thunderstorms or delays expected because of NOTAMs, where we carry more fuel. And if we do see that there's any reason to do so, we carry as much fuel as we need to do the flight. But we do not carry an excess amount of fuel, and that's simply because of environmental and economical reasons. An aircraft will burn more fuel the heavier it is. So if you are carrying around excess fuel, it means that you're burning excess fuel, which really there's no reason to do. So that's why we are not doing like you do with a car, where you just fuel it up. We fuel as much as we need for each flight, and that's it. Once we have decided on how much fuel that we're going to take, we also have to do some performance calculations. Let's say that we're flying to a destination which has really slippery runways, and now during the winter we have to make sure that we can land. So we now have electronic flight bags, so we can put in the weather we expected, the landing weight we expected, the winds and so on, and we can make sure that we can land. And we can also make sure that we can take off at our origin airport. So once we have that done, then we can order the fuel. And it's very important to do that as soon as possible, because when we order the fuel, we'll also give information to our dispatcher about the crew configuration, normally 2 and 4, the fuel we need to uplift, and also the fuel that we're expected to burn, and our maximum takeoff weight. And with that, the dispatcher will be able to start printing the load sheet that we will need for dispatch later on. So once this is all done, then it's time to go and speak to the cabin crew. I generally go over there, I reintroduce myself and the first officer, and I then check with all the crew who they are, how they're doing, if there's any issues that they have heard of that I haven't. And I will brief them on anything during the day that they might be interested in knowing. For example, if there's any turbulence expected, what kind of flight times we're looking at, if there's any other delays expected, or anything significant that I want them to keep an eye on. I'm also it's also really important at this stage to really infuse the fact that if they do see or hear anything out of the ordinary, that they tell me and the first officer as soon as possible, so that we can investigate into it. We're basically starting the CRM concept at the briefing stage, making sure that we all feel that we're a team, which is extremely important. So once we've had this discussion with the cabin crew, we will then go out towards the aircraft and decide who is going to be pilot flying and who is going to be pilot monitoring for the first flight. The pilot flying will go into the cockpit and start setting up for departure, and the pilot monitoring is the one who is going to be doing the walk around. The walk around is something that I want to cover in a different podcast. So in short, that's pretty much what we do. If you do have any questions, any specific questions, then feel free to go into my blog and ask them there. I'll be happy to answer anything that I can answer to you. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this, and keep sending me your questions. I'll keep answering them. Thank you.